My name is Alara, and for 28 years I have lived my life in the margins. In a city like Manhattan where everything is fast, loud, and disposable, I always felt like a vintage book placed on a shelf of modern tablets. Tonight was the Vane Enterprises charity gala. I didn't belong here. I was wearing a dress I'd found in a thrift shop in Brooklyn for $40. A simple, floor-length slip of emerald silk that I had spent 3 hours tailoring myself. My best friend Sophie, who worked in PR, had practically dragged me here, promising me that the view was worth the social anxiety. But as I stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by women dripping in Harry Winston diamonds and men wearing watches that cost more than my college tuition, I felt invisible. I watched the way people moved, the calculated smiles, the predatory glint in their eyes as they scouted for their next business deal or their next conquest. "I need air, Soph," I whispered, leaning into her ear over the swell of the orchestra. "Go," she laughed, already eyeing a junior executive. "The balcony on the north side is usually empty. Just don't jump. The view is addictive." I pushed through the glass sliding doors, and the humidity of the New York summer hit me, followed by the sudden blessed silence of the heights. The penthouse was 60 stories up. Below me the city was a grid of golden light and pulsing energy, but up here it felt like the world had stopped. I walked to the very edge of the marble railing, clutching my champagne glass. Sophie followed me out a moment later, her heels clicking against the stone. "You're doing that thing again," Sophie said, leaning next to me. "The I don't belong here face. Alara, you're 28. You're beautiful. You're a published poet, for heaven's sake. Why are you acting like a ghost?" I sighed, the bubbles in my glass dancing in the moonlight. "Because I feel like one sophomore. Look at them in there. They switch partners like they're trading stocks. It's all so mechanical." Sophie turned to me, her expression softening. "Is this about the right person again? Alara, we've talked about this. You're waiting for a fairy tale in a city built on steel." I looked out at the Empire State Building, feeling the weight of my own secret. "It's not a fairy tale I want. It's just meaning. I'm 28 years old, Sophie. In this city that makes me a prehistoric relic. I've never let anyone in. I'm still waiting. I'm still a virgin because I wanted the first time to be the only time. I wanted it to be with someone who actually saw me, not someone who just wanted to check a box." I laughed, but it was a dry, sad sound. "Can you imagine if any of those sharks in there knew? I'd be a joke. The 28-year-old virgin at the Julian Vane gala. It's my biggest secret, sophomore. And sometimes I feel like it's a wall I've built so high that I'll never be able to climb over it." What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly sensed, was that I wasn't alone. Tucked into the deep shadows of the stone pillar to my left, hidden by the sprawling leaves of a potted palm, stood a man. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He had stepped out for a moment of silence away from the sycophants and the liars. It was Julian Vane, the Glacier of Wall Street. The man who had built an empire worth $80 billion before his 35th birthday. He was standing perfectly still, a glass of neat scotch in his hand, his charcoal gray eyes fixed on the profile of my face. He had heard everything. He heard the tremor in my voice when I spoke about meaning. He heard the way I dismissed myself as a joke. And most of all, he heard the confession that shouldn't have mattered to a man like him. But it did. To Julian Vane, the world was a series of things he had already conquered. He had bought the tallest buildings, the fastest planes, and the most beautiful women. He lived in a world of done and bought. He had never encountered something, or someone, who was waiting. I turned to Sophie, unaware of the predator in the shadows. "Let's go back in. I think I've had enough air for one night." As we walked back into the light of the ballroom, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. I saw a tall silhouette step out from behind the pillar. For a fleeting second our eyes met. Julian Vane didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just stared at me with an intensity that felt like a physical weight against my chest. I shivered, pulling my thin silk wrap tighter around my shoulders. Who was that? Sophie asked, noticing my distraction. No one, I lied, my heart suddenly racing for reasons I couldn't explain. Just a shadow. I didn't know that the shadow was already making a phone call. I didn't know that by the time I reached my small apartment in Brooklyn that night, Julian Vane would know my name, my address, my blood type, and the title of every poem I had ever published. The glacier was no longer cold. He was burning with a new, dark obsession. And I was the only thing in the world he didn't yet own. The morning after the gala felt like a fever dream. I woke up in my tiny Brooklyn studio, the sunlight filtering through the fire escape, and told myself that the intense stare of Julian Vane was just a trick of the champagne and the moonlight. I went to work at the Inkwell, a small, dusty bookstore cafe tucked away on a cobblestone street. It was my sanctuary. I loved the smell of the espresso mingling with the scent of aging paper. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was a man who lived for poetry and quiet, and for 3 years, this shop had been the only place I truly felt at home. I was behind the counter, frothing milk for a latte, when the bell above the door didn't just chime, it rattled. 3 men walked in. They weren't hipsters looking for a rare vinyl, and they weren't students looking for a study nook. They were wearing charcoal suits that cost more than the bookstore's entire inventory. They moved with a clinical, cold efficiency that made the air in the room turn brittle. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting the milk pitcher down. The man in the lead didn't look at me. He looked at a tablet in his hand. "Mr. Henderson? We represent Vane Holdings. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the deed to this building and the commercial lease for this business have been transferred." Mr. Henderson came out from the back, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Transferred? I haven't put this shop on the market. This is my life's work. The previous landlord had a gambling debt that was purchased by our parent company," the suit replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "In lieu of payment, he surrendered the property. You aren't being evicted, Mr. Henderson. But you are now under new management." My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. "Vane Holdings. Who is the new manager?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The men in suits didn't have to answer. The heavy glass door swung open again, and the street noise of Brooklyn was suddenly cut off as a man stepped inside. It was him. Julian Vane didn't wear a suit today. He wore a black cashmere sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms that were lean and corded with muscle. He looked out of place among the dusty shelves of Victorian poetry, like a panther in a library. He didn't look at Mr. Henderson. He didn't look at the shelves. He walked straight to the counter and stopped inches away from me. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood, bergamot, and something dark like rain-soaked earth, overwhelmed the smell of the coffee. "Good morning, Alara," he said. His voice was lower than it had been on the balcony, a deep, private vibration that seemed to hum right through my skin. "What are you doing here, Mr. Vane?" I managed to say, my hands gripping the edge of the espresso machine so hard my knuckles turned white. "I told you last night," he said, his charcoal eyes raking over my face, lingering on my lips before returning to my eyes. "I have a very good memory for things that are rare. And I find that I prefer to keep my investments close to me." "I'm an investment now?" I felt a spark of anger through the fear. "You bought a whole building just to, what? Stalk me?" Julian leaned forward, resting his large, well-manicured hands on the counter. He was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his irises. "I bought this building because it was the only way to ensure that when I wanted to see you, no one could tell me no. I bought this building because I spent all night thinking about a secret told on a balcony, and I realized I didn't want anyone else breathing the same air as the woman who kept it." I felt my face heat up. "You had no right to listen. That was a private conversation. The air on my balcony belongs to me, Alara," he murmured, his voice dropping so low the men in suits couldn't hear. "And everything spoken into that air becomes my business. You told your friend you were waiting for someone who saw you. Well, look at me." I couldn't look away. It felt like he was stripping away every layer of my defense. I see you, Alara, he continued. I see the way you hide behind these books. I see the way you look at the world like you're afraid it's going to break you. And I see the truth you're guarding so fiercely. 28 years. That's 10,220 days of waiting. Did you really think a man like me wouldn't be obsessed with that kind of devotion? He reached out, his index finger tracing a slow, agonizing line along the top of my hand. I should have pulled away. I should have slapped him. But my body felt frozen, caught in the gravity of his obsession. Mr. Henderson. Julian called out, never breaking eye contact with me. Your shop needs an upgrade. New equipment, better security, and a direct line to my office. Alara will be the lead manager from now on. Double her salary. Give her whatever she needs. I don't want your money, Julian. I snapped, finally finding my voice. Good, he said, a ghost of a predatory smile touching his lips. Because I'm not paying for your work. I'm paying for your time. I'll be back at 6. We're going to dinner. I didn't say yes. Julian straightened up, his shadow stretching across the floor. He looked at the men in suits, then back at me. I don't ask questions I already know the answer to, Alara. You've spent 28 years waiting for a man who would notice you. Now that I have. Do you really think I'm going to let you say no? He turned and walked out, his stride confident and powerful. The door closed and the silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Henderson was staring at me. The suits were staring at me. I looked down at my hand where the skin still felt warm from his touch. I realized then that my secret wasn't a wall anymore. It was a beacon. And Julian Vane was a man who wouldn't stop until he had claimed the light for himself. 6 o'clock arrived like a deadline. I stood in the back of the bookstore, staring at my reflection in the small, cracked mirror of the employee restroom. I hadn't changed my clothes. I was still wearing my black work trousers and a simple cream blouse. Part of me, the stubborn, defiant part, wanted to show Julian Vane that I wouldn't be groomed into his version of a perfect woman. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, a black Maybach was idling at the curb. The door was opened by a driver who didn't look like a chauffeur. He looked like a soldier. Miss Alara? Mr. Vane is waiting. The interior of the car was a world of its own, scented with the same sandalwood and leather that clung to Julian. As we drove through the city, I realized we weren't heading to a restaurant. We were heading toward the helipad at the edge of the Hudson River. Where are we going? I asked the driver. The destination is private, miss, was all he said. 10 minutes later, I was strapped into the leather seat of a sleek, matte black helicopter. Julian was already there. He was wearing a dark suit now, but he had discarded the tie. He looked at me, and for a moment the roar of the rotors faded into the background. He didn't say hello. He didn't apologize for the suddenness of the evening. He reached out and buckled my seatbelt for me. His hands were steady, his fingers brushing against my waist. The proximity was overwhelming. You didn't change, he noted, his voice vibrating through the headset I'd been given. I'm a bookstore clerk, Julian. I don't have a closet full of gala gowns. I don't want the gown, Alara. I want the girl who wears her principles like armor. You're the only person in this city who hasn't tried to impress me today. It's maddeningly attractive. The helicopter rose and New York City turned into a playground of lights below us. We flew north, away from the noise, landing 20 minutes later on the roof of a secluded estate nestled in the cliffs of the Hudson Valley. The house was a masterpiece of glass and stone, jutting out over the water. It was quiet. Too quiet. There's no one here, I said as we walked into a dining room that overlooked the river. The table was set for two with candles flickering in the breeze. I sent the staff home, Julian said, pulling out a chair for me. I find that when I'm focused on something important, I don't want an audience. He poured a deep red wine into a crystal glass. I spent the afternoon looking into your past, Alara. Your poetry. Your grades. The way you've lived your life. You're a ghost in the digital world. No scandals. No boyfriends. Not even a stray photograph on social media. You've kept yourself so hidden. Why? Because I didn't want to be a product, Julian. I didn't want my life to be a series of likes and comments. Julian leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in his charcoal eyes. And yet you're here. With me. The man who turns everything he touches into a product. He reached across the table and took my hand. His skin was warm, his thumb tracing a slow, hypnotic circle on my palm. I've spent my life acquiring things that other people want. But you're something no one else even knew existed. That secret you told Sophie. About waiting. It's been a long time since anything has made me feel protective. But when I heard you say those words, I felt like I had found a diamond in a mountain of glass. I'm not a diamond, Julian. I'm a person. And your protection feels a lot like a cage. You bought my workplace. You tracked me here. What's next? A tracker in my shoe. Julian's expression didn't change, but his grip on my hand tightened slightly. I have 3 security teams stationed within a 2-block radius of your apartment, Alara. I have a digital firewall around your phone. Not to control you, but to ensure that the world doesn't touch what I've decided is mine. I pulled my hand away, my heart thumping against my ribs. I'm not yours. Not yet, he whispered. But you will be. You see, Alara, most men would see your secret as a challenge to be conquered. I see it as a trust to be earned. I'm going to show you that the man you were waiting for wasn't a poet or a dreamer. He was a man who had the power to keep the rest of the world at bay so you could finally breathe. He stood up and walked around the table, stopping behind my chair. He leaned down, his breath warm against my ear. I'm obsessed, Lara. I admit it. I've spent the last 24 hours memorizing your face. I know the way your eyes change color when you're nervous. I know the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. And I know that deep down behind all that armor, you're curious about me too. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even touch me again. He simply stood there, his presence a heavy, dark weight in the room. I looked out at the dark river, feeling the walls of the golden cage closing in. I was 28, and for the first time in my life I felt like the person I had been waiting for was finally here. But he wasn't a prince. He was a king. And kings didn't ask for love. They demanded it. For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. Julian didn't come to the bookstore every day, but I felt him everywhere. I felt him in the new security cameras that blinked with a tiny blue light in the corners of the ceiling. I felt him in the black car that sat at the end of my block every night, its engine idling like a sleeping beast. I was no longer Alara, the quiet poet. I was the vain interest. The shift happened on a humid Thursday afternoon. A man walked into the shop. He wasn't one of Julian's suits. He was older, with a silver beard and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, which were the color of cold dishwater. He wore a suit that looked expensive, but in a loud, flashy way that Julian would never tolerate. You must be the girl, the man said, leaning against the counter. He didn't order coffee. He just stared at me. The one Julian is hiding in this little antique box. I'm the manager, I said, my voice steady despite the prickle of fear on my neck. Can I help you find a book? I'm Marcus Thorne, he said, and the name landed like a heavy stone. Thorne was Julian's biggest rival, a man known for hostile takeovers and a reputation for being a shark in a world of piranhas. I didn't believe the rumors. Julian Vane, the man who treats women like disposable assets, is suddenly playing house with a virgin bookstore clerk? Sounded like a fairy tale. Or a weakness. I felt the blood drain from my face. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, Thorne whispered, leaning closer. The smell of stale tobacco and peppermint was cloying. He's obsessed with you, Alara. He's diverted 3 security teams and a private intelligence unit just to watch you sleep. He's distracted. And a distracted Julian Vane is a vulnerable Julian Vane. He reached out to touch a strand of my hair, but I flinched back. Don't worry, Thorne laughed, his eyes cold. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to warn you. Julian isn't protecting you because he loves you. He's protecting you because you're a mint condition collectible. The moment that secret of yours is gone, he'll get bored. He'll toss you aside like yesterday's newspaper. But if you come with me, if you give me the access codes to his private server that he surely has hidden on your laptop, I can make sure you never have to worry about him again. Get out, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Get out of my shop. Thorn shrugged, straightening his jacket. Suit yourself. But remember, Alara, the higher the pedestal he puts you on, the further you have to fall. And Julian Vane doesn't catch people when they drop. He walked out and the air in the shop felt tainted. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed the number Julian had forced me to save. He picked up on the first ring. Alara, what's wrong? Your heart rate sensor on your watch is spiking. I looked at the sleek silver watch Julian had given me, the one I thought was just a gift. It was a biometric tracker. He was literally monitoring my pulse. Marcus Thorne was here, I choked out. He knows Julian. He knows everything. The silence on the other end of the line was terrifying. It wasn't the silence of a man who was scared. It was the silence of a man who was calculating the best way to commit a murder. Stay where you are, Julian said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. Don't leave the shop. My lead security team is 30 seconds out. I'm coming to get you. 20 minutes later, the street outside was blocked off by 3 black SUVs. Julian burst through the door, his face a mask of cold, unadulterated fury. He didn't look at the books. He didn't look at the staff. He walked straight to me, his hands grabbing my shoulders as he checked me for injuries. Did he touch you? Julian hissed. Did he lay a hand on you? No, I whispered, tears finally blurring my vision. But Julian, he said I'm just a collectible to you. He said you're only here because of my secret. Julian pulled me into his chest, his arms wrapping around me with a strength that was almost painful. He buried his face in my hair, his breath coming in ragged hitches. Thorne is a dead man, Julian murmured against my skin. Not because he threatened my business, but because he looked at you. Because he dared to breathe the same air as the only thing in this world I actually care about. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine with a desperation I had never seen in him. It's not about the secret, Alara. It never was. The secret was just the hook that caught me. But the woman who stands her ground against sharks? The woman who writes poems about stars while living in a gutter? That's the woman I'm obsessed with. And if I have to burn this city to the ground to keep you safe from men like Thorne, I'll do it with a smile on my face. He didn't wait for my answer. He picked me up, cradling me against him as he walked toward the door. Where are we going? I asked. To my primary estate, he said, his jaw set in stone. The golden cage wasn't enough, Alara. Now I'm putting you in a fortress. And I'm never letting the world see you again until Thorne is a memory. As we sped away from the bookstore, I looked back at the small shop. I realized then that my life of margined poems and quiet lattes was truly over. I was in the eye of the storm now, and the man holding me was the storm itself. The fortress wasn't a metaphor. Julian's primary estate was a sprawling compound of black steel and reinforced glass, hidden deep in the forests of upstate New York. It was a place of silence, guarded by men with headsets and cold eyes who melted into the shadows as we passed. For the first 3 days I didn't see Julian. He was a ghost in his own home, locked in a room that looked like a war room, dismantling Marcus Thorne's life piece by piece. I was left to wander the endless hallways, my bare feet sinking into rugs that felt like woven silk. I felt like a bird that had been moved to a bigger cage. A more beautiful cage, yes, but a cage nonetheless. On the 4th night I couldn't sleep. The silence of the forest was too heavy. I wandered down to the ground floor, drawn by a flickering light coming from a room at the end of the wing. It wasn't the high-tech office I expected. It was a solarium filled with dead, withered plants and dust. In the center of the room sat Julian. He wasn't the Glacier tonight. He was slumped in a chair, a half-empty bottle of vintage rye on the floor beside him. He had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly. "Julian," I whispered. He flinched, his head snapping up. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in a thick layer of dark stubble. He looked human. For the first time he looked capable of breaking. "You shouldn't be in here, Alara," he said, his voice a jagged shadow of its usual self. "What is this place?" I asked, walking further into the room. Julian looked around at the dead vines and the cracked glass. "This was my mother's. She loved things that grew. She thought that if she could just keep enough green things alive, the house wouldn't feel so cold. My father, he didn't agree. He thought beauty was a distraction from power. When she died, he let it rot. And I kept it this way to remind myself what happens when you let yourself care about something fragile." He stood up, swaying slightly. He walked over to me, stopping just outside my personal space. The smell of rye and sorrow was thick around him. "Thorn is gone," he said suddenly. "I stripped his assets. I leaked his tax frauds. By morning he'll be in a federal holding cell. You're safe, Alara. You can go back to your bookstore. You can go back to your poems." My heart gave a strange, painful thud. "Is that what you want? For me to go?" Julian let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "What I want is irrelevant. I've spent 2 weeks suffocating you. I've tracked your heart rate. I've bought your world. I've been a monster, Alara. I saw something pure and my first instinct was to put it in a box so no one else could touch it. But seeing you walk through these halls like a ghost, I realized I'm becoming my father." He reached out, his hand trembling as he brushed his knuckles against my cheek. His touch was no longer predatory, it was reverent. "You said you were waiting for someone who saw you," he whispered. "But the truth is, I'm the one who was waiting. I was waiting for something that wasn't for sale. I was waiting for a reason to stop being the glacier. And when I heard you on that balcony, I didn't just want to protect your secret. I wanted to be worthy of it." I looked into his eyes and saw the truth. His obsession hadn't been about a collectible. It had been a desperate, clawing attempt to hold on to the only light he had ever found in a life of cold darkness. "Julian," I said, my voice cracking. "The secret, the fact that I'm 28 and it was never because I was afraid. It was because I was saving myself for a moment that felt real. For a man who would look at me and see Alara, not a PR opportunity or a trophy." I reached up and took his hand, pressing it against my heart so he could feel the frantic, steady rhythm through my silk nightgown. "Marcus Thorne said you'd get bored once the secret was gone," I whispered. "He said I was just a mint condition item to you." Julian's eyes darkened with a sudden, fierce heat. He stepped into me, his body a wall of warmth against mine. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me so close I could feel the thud of his own heart. "Thorne is a fool," Julian hissed. "The secret is just the beginning, Alara. I don't want to be your first because it's a trophy. I want to be your first, your last, and everything in between because I want to be the one who finally shows you that you were right to wait. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you were right to believe in the right person." He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm still obsessed, Alara. That won't change. I'll still want to know where you are. I'll still want to burn the world for you. But I don't want to be your jailer anymore. I want to be your home." In that dusty, dead solarium, the glacier finally broke. And as I looked at the man who had bought my world just to keep it safe, I realized I didn't want to run anymore. I reached up and pulled his head down, my lips meeting his in a kiss that tasted of rye, salt, and 5 years of hidden longing. It wasn't a princess meeting a prince. It was 2 broken, lonely people finally finding the one person who knew exactly how to put the pieces back together. The morning after the storm in the solarium felt like the first day of a new world. I woke up not in a guest room, but in Julian's massive bed, the sunlight pouring over the black silk sheets. For the first time, Julian wasn't a shadow or a stalker. He was lying beside me, his arm draped possessively over my waist, watching me sleep. "You're staring," I whispered, my voice thick with sleep. "I've spent billions of dollars to have the best views in the world, Alara," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "And none of them come close to this." The next few weeks were a delicate dance. Julian kept his word. The high-tech trackers were gone, replaced by a simple, elegant gold ring on my finger. Not an engagement ring, not yet, but a promise. He still had security, but they were invisible now, a quiet safety net rather than a cage. But there was one final thing that needed to be done. The world still saw me as a mystery, and they still saw Julian as the cold, untouchable glacier. "It's time to go home, Alara," Julian said one morning. We drove back to Brooklyn, but we didn't go to my tiny studio apartment. We stopped in front of the inkwell. The closed sign was still in the window, but the shop looked different. The brick had been cleaned, the ivy trimmed, and the glass polished until it gleamed. Julian handed me a heavy brass key. "Mr. Henderson retired," Julian explained, watching my face. "He took the payout I gave him and moved to a cottage in Vermont to write his memoirs. But the shop needs a soul. It's not Vane Holdings property anymore, Alara. Check the deed." I looked at the paperwork in the passenger seat. The owner wasn't Julian Vane. It was Alara Vance. He had bought it for me, not as my landlord but as my partner. "You gave me back my world," I whispered, the tears blurring my vision. "No," Julian said, taking my face in his hands. "I gave you a world where you are the boss. I want you to write your poems. I want you to sell your books. And I want to be the man who waits outside at 6 o'clock to take you home." The final public moment happened a month later. Julian invited me to the annual Founders Gala, the same event where he had overheard my secret a year prior. This time I didn't wear a thrift store dress. I wore a gown of midnight velvet, custom-made to fit me like a second skin. As we walked into the ballroom, the silence was immediate. The sharks and the socialites froze, watching the man who never cared for anyone guide me through the room as if I were made of glass and gold. We walked out onto the same balcony. The north balcony. "A year ago I stood right there," I said, pointing to the pillar. "I told Sophie I was waiting for someone who saw me." Julian stepped behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. We looked out at the New York skyline together. A city that no longer felt like a predator but like a kingdom. "And a year ago I stood right here," Julian whispered, "and I realized that everything I had built was empty because I had no one to share it with who wasn't trying to steal it. You were waiting for a man, Alara. But I was waiting for a reason to be one." He turned me around, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond so clear it looked like a drop of frozen water. "Alara, I'm still obsessed with you. I still want to know your every thought. I still want to protect you from every shadow. But I want to do it as your husband. I've spent 28 years of my life in the cold. Will you spend the rest of yours keeping me warm?" I didn't need to think. I didn't need to wait any longer. "Yes, Julian. Yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, the orchestra inside began to play a soft, triumphant waltz. The glacier had melted and the poet had finally found her muse. I was 28 when I confessed my secret on a balcony, and I was 29 when I realized that the best things in life aren't the ones you find, they're the ones that are worth waiting for. The world still calls him a billionaire. They still call him powerful. But to me he's just Julian. The man who heard a whisper in the dark and followed it until it led him home. Final call to action. Narrator voice. Deep, warm, and lingering. And that, my dear listeners, is the story of Alara and Julian. A testament to the power of staying true to yourself in a world that wants you to change. Sometimes, the person you think is your shadow is actually the one meant to lead you into the light. If this 60-minute journey moved you, please subscribe to English Story with Masha. We put our hearts into every word to bring you these cinematic experiences. Hit that like button if you believe everyone has a right person waiting for them. And I want to hear your heart. Comment the word chosen if you loved Julian's transformation from a stalker to a husband. Don't forget to click on the video on your screen now for more billionaire romances that will melt your heart. Until next time, keep your secrets safe and your heart open. Have a wonderful night and enjoy the love, everyone.